Okay, we will go ahead and get started this morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the District Consolidated Monitoring Training webinar for the 2023-2024 Consolidated Monitoring season. My name is Erica Tipton, and I'm a Title I Part A consultant in the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. And before we get started this morning, as Erin mentioned, just a few housekeeping items for us. If you could please ensure that your mic is muted during the presentation, as well as having your camera off so that folks can focus on the presentation and not the other cameras that are on around them. That would help us to ensure the best presentation quality, both sound and visually. We will stop and check in to see if anyone has questions throughout the presentation. And at that time, you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you wish. You can also use the chat or the raise hand function in Teams, and we can call on you at that point. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send the link out to all participants shortly after the call so that you can go back and refer to the information shared today as needed throughout the monitoring season. And so briefly, here is our agenda for this morning. We are going to have a quick welcome where we'll talk about the purpose of monitoring and how we've gotten to this point today. We'll talk about the flow of communication and the overall process for scheduling, just a high-level overview of what that's going to look like. We'll also talk about how to provide evidence and talk a little bit about personally identifiable information, or PII. We'll talk briefly about our reporting processes, and then you'll hear from each individual program on instructions and processes for their individual monitoring, and then we'll have some opportunities for final questions toward the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Erin to give a little welcome for us.
All right, thanks, Erica. Good morning, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch, and the consolidated monitoring process is a part of our branch. So as Erica said, we just want to kind of touch on very quickly the purpose of monitoring. The number one reason that we monitor, of course, is that this is a requirement for us to check for compliance as the pass-through entity. This is required under the Uniform Grant Guidance, which are regulations for all federal spending. Another reason that we monitor is we like to identify and celebrate your successes with you. Hear about some of these best practices that can maybe be shared out with other districts and schools. And then finally, this also provides us with an opportunity to provide some technical assistance, maybe help you strengthen some of your practices to get them to that best practice level. We do select our districts for monitoring based on a very robust risk assessment process. This is another thing we're required to do. We are required to assess the risk for the districts receiving federal awards. And many of the programs who are part of the consolidated monitoring process have their own risk assessment tools. We also have a community risk assessment tool with kind of some overlapping things, and we use that data. We meet together as a team to look at that and determine who's going to be monitored for the year. And I will turn it back to Erica now.
Okay. So now we are going to talk briefly about the flow of communication during the preparation for the visit. I will work mainly with the designated district point of contact to develop a schedule for all programs for the day or days of our visit. And now typically this point of contact is the Title I coordinator, and that's who I will initially reach out to unless you do wish to designate someone else for this task. The reason that we typically tap the Title I coordinator for scheduling is simply due to the fact that every district in the state of Kentucky receives Title I, so we know there's always going to be a point person in place for that program. If you do wish to designate someone else as your main point of contact for scheduling, please do reach out to me, and I will share my email address at the end of the presentation. So after the Title I coordinator and I complete a master schedule for the visit, I will then introduce you to your Title I lead, and that will be your main point of contact for any logistics throughout the remainder of your preparation time, as well as the main point of contact on the days of your visit. And note, this is typically not your regularly assigned Title I consultant at KDE. Whenever possible, we do try to send a different Title I consultant to lead your monitoring trip. Throughout the time that I'm working with the Title I coordinator to devise a schedule for our visit, other KDE program consultants will also be reaching out to their district counterparts to begin communicating other programmatic details to help you prepare. So Title I coordinators, this slide is mainly for you. 8 weeks prior to your visit, you will receive an email from me. And in that email, I will provide you with a scheduling tool that details each program's needs for our visit. And I'll also provide you with a sample schedule that you can use to create your own using the details that we provide you on the scheduling tool. Our hope is that you won't have to reinvent the wheel. Last year we had several really good schedules from districts that participated last year, so I will share those with you and you can tweak them as you like to get your schedule pulled together. So the scheduling tool that I send you will detail the personnel that we need to meet and interview, the time duration needed the time duration that is needed for those interviews, and the location where we would like to conduct each interview, as well as any other logistics that might help you in creating a schedule for each program. I usually give you about a week to review the tool and template that I send, and then I reach out to set up a time on Teams where we can talk through the logistics together and get you started and talk through a timeline for completion. But you're always welcome to reach back out to me to get started earlier if you would like. Your visit will begin at central office on the first day. We will conduct a brief 30-minute opening meeting where we will do introductions that will help you put names and faces together. We'll set the tone for our visit and answer any final logistical questions. And an agenda for that meeting will be provided for you on your scheduling tool. So after all of the introductions are made, we'll all disperse to follow the schedule as it's been laid out for the week. At the point that the schedule is finalized and I connect you with your Title I lead, you will then have a brief check-in call with that person. And on that call, you'll talk through the schedule as well as any other logistics for the trip and answer any lingering questions that you have. The Title I lead will also check in with you at that time to make sure that evidence has been uploaded to SharePoint for all programs. And we'll talk about that on the next slide as well. This check-in happens typically 2 weeks prior to your visit. Then the week before your visit, we'll do one final quick email or phone call to check in and make sure that everything is good to go, especially for those earlier visits where weather may play a factor in our travel. There are a couple of weeks built into our schedule for makeup dates if we end up having to cancel for snow. Before we move on to the next topic, are there any questions at this point just about scheduling?
We don't have anything in the chat right now.
Okay. We will move on then, and I'll pass it back over to Erin to talk about providing evidence.
All right. So we will have SharePoint folders organized for you to submit all of the required documentation for each program. And we will give district contacts access to these folders prior to the visit. And you should all have access to these folders around mid-November. One of the things that you're going to be providing for us is a list of staff who are going to need access to SharePoint, and that access is at the discretion of the district and or the program. For example, some programs may find it easier to have all of the documents submitted to the district point of contact and that one person uploads it, whereas some others may think it's more helpful to have a couple of different people who can upload the evidence. That is up to you. Any required evidence for any of the participating programs must be submitted 2 full weeks prior to your monitoring visit. Although if you can get it in before that 2-week mark, that is also great. The reason that we do this is it helps ensure that KDE staff have ample time to review all of your evidence before the visit. Reviewing evidence beforehand really helps us determine what kind of follow-up questions we need to ask during interviews, and maybe if there are some questions that we don't have to ask because the evidence fully demonstrated compliance. We also ask that you refrain from submitting links to documents stored in an online space, such as a Google Drive. And there are several reasons for this requirement. We at KDE need to be able to control who has access to the documentation and for how long, which we cannot do through a district or a school Google Drive. We also need the documentation that's submitted for monitoring to be stored in accordance with a standard file structure, as this enables us to more quickly navigate through the evidence. We also archive monitoring documentation in a secure SharePoint site per our record retention process, and we hang on to that for a number of years. So maintaining all documentation after the fact is our responsibility, and so we need that to be in a location that we control. So we really appreciate you sending us or uploading the actual documents and not links to things. We ask that you upload all documentation to the SharePoint folders as labeled. This ensures that we have the ability to view the files and store all the submitted evidence, again, in accordance with our record retention process. And clearly labeling, oops, we moved ahead. There we go.
Sorry.
All right, that's okay. Clearly labeling your evidence is going to help the reviewer know exactly what you're providing, what it's intended to satisfy. If each file name provides the reviewer with a general idea of the document contents, it allows us to locate specific documents more easily, and it can really speed up the evidence review process on our end. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're uploading your evidence. All right, let's go. All right, personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information, or PII, is information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, either alone or when combined with other personal or identifying information that is linked or is linkable to a specific individual. So SharePoint access is going to be granted to many individuals at KDE, as well as at the district level, maybe even at the school level as well. All evidence containing PII must be redacted before being uploaded into SharePoint. Some of our programs will request some documentation that includes PII, and those programs will reach out and work with you to provide an additional form of secure document submission, or they may ask to look at a couple things on site if it's just not feasible to redact all of that PII. Protecting PII is of the utmost importance. If KDE consultants discover PII in a piece of documentation during our evidence review process, we will reach out to the district and request that the document be removed from SharePoint and that the PII be redacted and then uploaded back into SharePoint, just so we ensure that none of that information is on SharePoint. So just a quick overview of what is PII. Of course, we've got student names. Students or their parent or guardian or other family member names. I will say a little note about this. Adult names alone are not PII. So if we're talking about some meeting minutes, which list the attendees or maybe a sign-in sheet for something, it's not necessary to redact that information. But if that name is combined with an address, a phone number, a student name, etc., then it becomes PII and it does need to be redacted. So we've also got the student or the family's address, any sort of personal identifiers, social security number, student ID number, etc. Other direct identifiers such as date of birth, place of birth, mother's maiden name, and then just any other information that alone or in combination is linked or linkable to a specific person. And I'll let Erica talk about reporting.
Hey, thank you. Before I move on to talk about the reporting process, are there any questions at this point about evidence? I'm sorry about the lighting on my end. Okay, if there are no
No
questions.
questions in the chat. Oh, we do. We actually do have a question.
Okay.
Let's see.
Go ahead, Miss Flaherty. Do you want to unmute yourself or
Yes.
just pop it in the chat? Okay.
I do have just a quick clarifying question when we're thinking about evidence. Are we collecting evidence just from this current school year or previous years as well?
That will depend on the program, and that will be outlined on each program's checklist. I know for Title I, I think most of us are going to go over which years we're going to look at in our individual program presentations, but for example, Title I will typically be looking at the current school year, but we do go back to look at last year in particular for things like your services to homeless students, private school students, and then your parent and family engagement. So each program will kind of outline that for you, which year or years of evidence they're going to look for. That's a good question. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to move on to talk about the reporting. 8 weeks after we leave, each KDE program that participated in your monitoring is going to provide their own individual program report. And that report is focused on compliance and will detail strengths seen across the program or across the district, recommendations for improvement, and if applicable, any compliance findings that need to be addressed. These reports are tools for you to use at the district level, and we do not share them publicly. Each program coordinator will work with their assigned KDE consultant to satisfy any compliance findings that require follow-up. Then 12 weeks after our visit, a consolidated monitoring report will be sent to your superintendent. This report is a public report and will be posted on the KDE website. However, there will not be any actionable findings on this report. We'll detail recommendations that we hope you take action on. And the purpose of this report is to just give you a high-level overview of our visit that will detail some common strengths that we have seen across all participating programs, and then also some common opportunities for improvement or recommendations to strengthen your collaborative efforts across all of your programs. So now we're going to switch gears and hear from each individual program participating in consolidated monitoring this year. And those programs are all of your titles, your Title I, II, III, IV, and V, as well as alternative education, gifted and talented, and preschool. So all of these folks are going to share details about how to prepare for their visit. And let's see. We will go ahead and get started then with Title I. So we'll bounce back to Aaron here.
All right, first up, the duration of our visit. It's going to be 1 to 3 days, depending on the size of your district and the number of schools that you serve. We do need to meet with a number of people. We're going to want to talk to the Title I coordinator, as well as points of contact for homeless, foster care, English learners, your finance officer. Then at the school level, we'll want to talk to the principals of the public and any private schools that are being served. And then any other district level staff who are paid with Title I funds, such as bookkeepers or instructional coaches. Our monitoring checklists are posted on the KDE website, and they will also be available in your SharePoint folder once you receive access to that. I do want to highlight this. Please do not miss the school level folders. So within the main Title I SharePoint folder, you'll see a folder for each section of the district checklist. You will also see a folder that says school level monitoring. If you click on that, then you're going to have a folder for each school. And we do need their information uploaded there. As I mentioned earlier, the evidence is due 2 weeks prior to the visit. Our checklists detail suggested pieces of documentation, as well as, in some cases, some required items. Our checklists also say to submit 1 to 2 pieces of evidence per indicator. We do need Munis reports for the current school year and the prior school year. So for us, that's going to be 310K and 310J. Other than those Munis things, all of our other evidence is going to be for the current year only. When it comes to documentation, we do try to stress, we want you to think about quality over quantity. If we have a few pieces of detailed documentation, that can be much more effective at demonstrating compliance than, say, a dozen pieces of documentation without a lot of detail. We do have a new resource that's available on our Title I Part A Documents and Resources webpage, and it's linked here on the slide. This is called the Documentation Training Webinar, and it includes a walkthrough of all of our monitoring checklists, some examples of effective documentation, and just some general documentation tips. You can always contact your assigned Title I team lead with any additional questions about evidence. Okay, and we have an exit interview that will be approximately 30 minutes long. During that meeting, we're going to outline next steps for the monitoring process. Our Title I team will need to meet to discuss what we observed during the interviews, review our notes that we took, maybe take a look at evidence another time. So we're not able to share any compliance findings during that exit interview. The Title I coordinator should be at that exit interview. And other individuals, such as, say, the superintendent, may wish to attend as well. And that is all for Title I Part A.
Are there any questions for Title I before we move on to our next program? Okay, then we will move on to hear from Title II.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Kelly with the Title II Part A team. We typically conduct our visits in 1 day, but depending upon the size of the district and allocation of the funds, we may need 2. We will need to meet with the Title II coordinator, district finance officer, and any district or school staff that is actually paid with Title II funds. This would include such staff as instructional coaches, class size reduction staff, and those involved with teacher induction programs. If you allocate funds to schools, we would also like to meet with the principals. In the SharePoint folders, you will find the self-assessment document. This document can also be found in your Title II handbook in the appendix and also on our webpage. This document mirrors what we are looking for during the monitoring visit. On the self-assessment document, you will find some suggested types of evidence, but you're not limited to those. You can submit documentation that you actually think best represents your programs. Please upload those documentations materials 2 weeks prior to the visit. In addition to the self-assessment and supporting documentation, we also need your current and prior Munis reports, like Title I said, but ours is 401K and 401J. For Title II, we have 4 staff members who will visit as a team. One of those will actually be the lead for that particular district. We can provide an exit interview if you desire one, and if you do, it's usually about 30 to 45 minutes. And that's it for Title II. Any questions?
Okay, looks like we're good, so we can thank you.
Thank you.
And we will move on now to hear from Title III.
Actually, we did get a question in the chat. Jamie's asked, is it detailed munis reports? I think that will be specified on the different monitoring checklists and information from the programs. For example, I know for Title I, we do ask for those month-to-date budget reports with purchase order level detail.
Good morning, I'm Brandy Neal and I'm a Title III consultant. The duration of our visit will be 1 day, depending on the size of your district. We'll need to meet with your EL coordinator or Title III person. Our checklist is uploaded in the SharePoint folder, and it's also divided by specific parts of our checklist. Evidence for us is due 2 weeks prior to the visit. Required and suggested documentation for Title III is detailed on the checklist. Sorry, I was reading the chat to make sure I wasn't missing anything. We need munis reports for the current and prior year, 345K and 345J, and all of the other evidence is just for the current year only. Each visit will be assigned a Title III lead, and you will be in contact with the Title III team lead. We can provide an exit interview at your request. Typically, we don't need one, but if you would like for us to do an exit interview, we would be happy to. And if you have any questions on anything that is required on the checklist or uploading anything, please reach out to your Title III department. We would be happy to help.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for the Title III folks?
We've got one in the chat. So their funds go to the Northern Kentucky co-op. So Jamie is asking if they're going to be monitored in that area.
What district are you from, Jamie?
Fort Thomas.
Yes, you will be.
Okay, if there are no other questions for Title III, we'll move on to hear from our Title IV team.
Good morning, I'm Lee Bowling, and Layla Brewer and I are program consultants with Title IV Part A. Our Title IV Part A interviews will last 1 to 2 days depending on the number of programs being supported with your Title IV Part A funds. We will review the current year, 552K, and the previous year, 552J. We will need to interview the Title IV Part A coordinator and the finance officer individually for about an hour on each one of those, and then anyone being paid with Title IV Part A funds, and any additional relevant staff, as well as administrators at any private non-public schools being served. The Title IV Part A monitoring tool and self-assessment are posted on the KDE Title IV webpage and will also be available in your SharePoint folder. The monitoring tool includes evidence examples of items that may be used to satisfy any findings. The self-assessment can be used as a checklist for the district to ensure all sections have the corresponding documentation or responses uploaded. Please review the monitoring tool and any information listed in your approved GMAP application, and then upload evidence that the district feels would satisfy that section of the tool. Our questions during the interviews will be connected to the sections within the monitoring tool. Each district will be assigned a KDE Title IV Part A team lead who will remain in contact with your Title IV Part A coordinator prior to your district's monitoring and will be the point of contact for any required follow-up. And I'll pass it back to you, Erica.
Thank you, Lee. Are there any questions for Title IV?
I don't
Okay.
see anything.
All right. If we are good with Title IV for now, we'll move on to hear from Ms. Shoshana with Title V.
Hello, I am Shoshana Williams. I am the Title V coordinator, and when I come to visit, I'm going to need a day because I'm usually just working with the Title V coordinator. It's going to take from about, I would just say an hour, just plan on an hour, but it could be less. The checklist is posted on the KDE website, and it's also available in your SharePoint folder under Title V. The evidence is due 2 weeks prior to the visit. Required and suggested documentation for Title V is detailed on those checklists that you will see. Munis reports are for the current and prior year, so 350J and 350K. All other evidence is for the current year only. And because we do have 10 districts and 8 of the 10 that we're monitoring, and 8 of the 10 have Title V, some visits will be conducted virtually. So if you are one of the districts that have a virtual visit, or a virtual interview, I will be scheduling that with the Title V coordinator. Any questions for Title V?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Shoshana. And we will move on to hear from our alternative education team.
For alternative education, we'll need about a full day for each program, unless it's an on-site program. And we can usually get those done within a few hours, depending on how many students, et cetera. We'll need to meet with the principal or vice principal or head teacher, or just the general leadership of the program, teachers in the program. We'll do classroom observations, student interviews, and we prefer to meet with mental health staff if that is available for the alternative program. If not, we're happy to meet with a guidance counselor. We will be sending a checklist to the districts prior to the visit, about 4 to 6 weeks. Evidence is due 2 weeks prior to the visit. And here's our contact information for my partner, Letitia, and myself. That's it for us.
Thank you. Any questions for our alternative education team?
Nothing's come through.
Okay, we will move on then to hear from Miss Kathy Anderson with Gifted and Talented.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kathy Anderson. I'm the only person in the Gifted and Talented program. So this is why the visit is virtual. The virtual visit allows me to have more time and energy to focus on your visit. You can imagine if I was doing all 10 visits, I wouldn't have as much time to really focus on the documentation that you're uploading, and to have the energy for interviews and things I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. So I hope that you understand why it's a virtual visit. The duration of the visit is 1 to 3 days, depending on the size of your district and the numbers of schools served. This also allows, since many of you wear many hats, including sometimes some of you the GT hat, for us to have more flexibility as I'm virtual. Who I need to meet with? I'll need to meet with the GT coordinator, the GT teacher or teachers, and teachers who provide any services to GT students or collaborate with the GT teacher. There will be a self-study uploaded to the SharePoint site or checklist. It'll be available in the district SharePoint folder. All of the evidence from the self-study will be due 2 weeks before the visit. There'll also be a record review of student documentation. 10 SSIDs will be emailed 2 weeks before the visit. If there are any students who I send SSIDs to you, and those students are no longer enrolled in your district, if you'd be so kind as to let me know, and I'll send you another SSID. The evidence for the Record reviews is due 3 days before the visit. The interviews usually last about 30 minutes. Sometimes the GT coordinator visit goes a little longer, about 45 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions right now for Kathy for Gifted and Talented?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay, so we will then move on. Last but not least, we will hear from our state-funded preschool team.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Rutherford. I'm a consultant within the Early Learning Unit, which takes care of all things preschool. The duration of our visit will be 1 to 3 days, depending on the size of your district and the number of schools where preschool is located. Who we need to meet with, a preschool coordinator, whoever that may be, preschool teachers and assistant teachers at each site, and principals if applicable. For example, a standalone preschool, the principal may actually be the preschool coordinator. In an elementary school where that's not the case, that might be more optional. Self-study will be available in our SharePoint folder, and one self-study will be used for all preschool classrooms in the district. Evidence is due 2 weeks prior to the visit. You will find required and suggested documentation for state-funded preschool detailed on the self-study. The contact will be the assigned Title I team lead, and there will not be an exit interview required.
All right, thank you. Okay, so as we move along the process to prepare for your monitoring visit, if you have program-specific questions, please feel free to reach out to the contacts that are listed here. You'll have access to this presentation shortly after the call today so that you can go back and refer to this slide or to any of the other links that have been shared throughout the presentation. And with that, are there any lingering questions before we conclude our presentation?
Okay, we were curious about the schools that you visit. Is that selected by the district, or do you guys select those? And when will we know which schools that you will be going to?
So that is selected by KDE. Each program will be selecting that. Several of our programs, I believe, don't even go to the school level. For example, for Title I, we will go anywhere where a school is operating a Title I program, but that will all be detailed when you hear from your individual program, as well as during the scheduling process. It will outline where we need to go.
Okay, you said we have to wait until it's time to start that scheduling, or can we go ahead and start that process now?
Wait until you receive the information from Erica, because each program has set, windows of time that they need to be at each place and different requirements. I'm sorry, I put a cough drop in when the webinar ended, so I'm like eating candy.
Yeah, we were just curious because we have 17 schools and 11 are Title I, and we're kind of widespread. Very rural. And very rural, so we were just curious about that.
And we vary the size of our monitoring team depending on how many schools there are. So, for example, for your district, I think there's going to be about 6 Title I people operating in 2-person teams, knocking out different schools over the course of a couple of days.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And so we just want to thank you for joining us this morning. As Erin mentioned earlier, you will be receiving access to your district's SharePoint folders at some point in November, at which time you are welcome to begin uploading your evidence. And then I'll reach out to you 8 weeks prior to your visit to begin the scheduling process. And in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to any one of us at any point if you have questions or need assistance. So that does conclude our presentation today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon and a lovely weekend.